They say the mountains will keep your secrets. Turns out, they'll also hold someone else's lies, at least until you catch them in the act. It was a Friday afternoon when I finally clocked out of what felt like the longest week in startup history. A major investor demo had gone sideways, one of my engineers nearly fried a board with a backwards capacitor, and my inbox had somehow multiplied like bacteria in a petri dish. But none of that mattered once I turned off the highway and started climbing into the foothills of the Bitterroots. That gravel road, barely wide enough for my truck, was the artery leading straight to peace. 40 acres of untouched forest, privacy, and the only kind of silence that doesn't feel oppressive. I bought the land 6 months ago. Clear deed, no encumbrances, not a single homeowners association in sight. Just me, my dream, and a patch of Montana that wasn't interested in telling me what color my cabin should be. I'd already installed a temporary modular unit to stay in on weekends, a string of solar panels, and a high-end security system I built myself as a prototype for my company. Nothing fancy. Motion sensors, a handful of 4K cameras, and a private LTE relay hooked up to the satellite net. Just enough to keep an eye on things when I wasn't around. Most weeks, there was nothing to see but squirrels, wind, and the occasional over-curious elk. This time was different. As soon as I pulled into the clearing and checked the security console in the module, I noticed a spike in motion alerts. The camera covering the rear section of the property, just before the tree line, had picked up activity on Tuesday, and Wednesday, and Thursday, all between noon and 3. Not animals, human, bipedal, warm-blooded, on foot. Curious, I rewound the feed, expecting maybe a stray hiker or someone lost. Instead, I saw something that made my jaw tighten. Someone had dragged lumber, actual cut boards, across my tree line. Then a stack of what looked like roofing shingles. The video wasn't high enough resolution to read faces from that angle, but the activity was steady and deliberate. Construction. In the middle of my forest, on land that, I should remind everyone, I legally own, taxes paid, GPS marked and staked per the county's requirements. My first thought? Squatters. Meth heads, maybe, though the gear didn't look improvised enough. Then I thought maybe a local trail builder got the maps wrong. It happens. I locked up the module and hiked toward the back edge of the lot, the one that borders a steep ravine and, on the far side, a neighbor's 2-acre plot. The trail I use for inspections was overgrown, but passable. It didn't take long to spot the unnatural shape through the trees, a square roof line where there should have been nothing but pine and sky. When I stepped out into the clearing, I stopped dead. There, about 150 feet from my rear marker, stood a brand-new cabin. A small one, but sturdy. Wood siding, tin roof, solar panel on one side, even a goddamn fire pit with arranged seating. The door had a digital keypad lock, and someone had gone out of their way to rake the dirt flat, stack wood neatly by the porch, and hang a lantern from the post. It looked like something out of a catalog, a wilderness escape, rustic and charming, and sitting squarely on my land. I walked a slow circle around it, keeping my distance, looking for any signs. No trespassing warnings, posted names, utility tags. Nothing. The cabin was wired for solar, but had no water line. There was a compost toilet unit off to one side, a bear-proof storage box for food, and what looked like a motion-activated wildlife cam mounted on a tree nearby. I knew that model. I'd reviewed it for a trade blog 2 years ago. Whoever built this knew what they were doing, but they sure as hell didn't ask me first. I pulled out my phone and dialed the Ravalli County Sheriff's Department. I wasn't about to go full vigilante, but I needed a record of this. "Sheriff's office," said the dispatcher. "Yes, hi," I said. "I need to report a possible illegal structure on private property. I'm the owner, and I found what looks like a short-term rental cabin built in my woods. There was a pause. Then she asked for the address. I gave the official parcel number. Oakview Ridge, Lot 4. Another pause. Then she said something I didn't expect. That property is already listed as an active short-term rental site. There's a permit on file, issued last month. My stomach sank. No, it's not. I own Lot 4. That's my land. I never applied for a rental permit. But the records, she insisted, showed a different name. A woman named Karen Ripley. My brain started assembling the puzzle with that old, dreadful click of inevitability. Karen Ripley. The woman who owned the adjacent 2-acre lot across the ravine. I met her once in passing, months ago. She mentioned something about her land being unusable. No water, no access road, completely boxed in by mine. I remember her chuckling, calling it her retirement mistake. Apparently, she'd decided to turn that mistake into my problem. I ended the call with the dispatcher after asking them to escalate it to a deputy and walked back to my truck, every footstep echoing louder than it should have. If Karen Ripley thought I wouldn't notice a cabin built on my own land, she didn't understand two things. One, I watch everything. And two, I build security systems for a living. This was going to get interesting. The first thing I did after getting home that Sunday night was crack open a beer, sit down at my desk, and pull up Airbnb. It didn't take long to find it. There it was, listed under the name Wilderness Retreat Cabin, Off-Grid Serenity, Oakview Ridge. $219 per night. A rustic escape, nestled deep in the Montana pines, complete with solar power. No cell service for full disconnection. And a promise of absolute seclusion. No neighbors for miles. That last line hit differently now that I knew the exact GPS, coordinates, because that seclusion, that was me. I was the neighbor for miles. The photos were glossy, clearly staged with professional lighting, sunlight coming through the pines, cozy interior with wool throws and pine slab counters. There were fairy lights strung on the porch, a fire pit with 2 Adirondack chairs. One of the images even showed the backside of my own property fence in the blurry background. There were over a dozen 5-star reviews. Guests loved it. The perfect escape, one read. I've never felt so safe and surrounded by nature, said another. Someone had even brought their golden retriever. I wasn't sure what pissed me off more, the fact that someone was illegally squatting on my land, or that they were making a solid side income doing it. The host profile was listed as KJ Management. No picture, no phone number. But the calendar showed that the cabin had been booked solid almost every weekend for the last 2 months. I copied every detail. Screenshots of the listing, guest reviews, the permit number, even the metadata in the photos. Then I started digging deeper. Through a little domain sleuthing and a throwaway Gmail account, I reached out as a potential guest, asking about last-minute availability. I also flagged the listing through Airbnb's official form, tagging it as potential land fraud. That process was painfully slow, but I wanted a paper trail. The next step was real world. I drove back up the next day, parked just before my tree line, and hiked in a slightly wider perimeter, trying to spot signs of access. That's when I found the path, subtle, but clearly used. Someone had cleared a rudimentary trail that connected the back of the cabin toward the ravine, weaving just enough to avoid detection from the road. At the bottom of the incline, nestled near the county road, was a large boulder with a slight clearing beside it, flat enough for a car to pull in unnoticed. That's when I had an idea. I pulled the hard drive from one of the trail cams I'd set up months ago, one aimed at the access road. I hadn't reviewed the footage in weeks, but as soon as I started scanning through it, I struck gold. There he was, a man in his late 50s, gray beard, heavy set, driving a silver Subaru Outback, pulling into the side of the road, stepping out, and standing at the mouth of the game trail. On several days. Same time window as the motion alerts from the cabin cam. On one video, he was clearly waving someone down. Minutes later, a couple with backpacks and rolling duffels walked up. The man handed them a clipboard and what looked like a key. It was a keypad code, handwritten, and a laminated map. I couldn't hear the audio, but it didn't take a lip reader to know he was saying, "Enjoy your stay." I stared at the frame, zooming in. The man was familiar. I dug through some emails and found a copy of the original property sale. My neighbor's name on the adjacent parcel, Karen Ripley. Her husband's name was Martin. Martin Ripley was running check-in services for an illegal Airbnb built on my land. The next few hours were a blur. I submitted a formal complaint to the sheriff's department, referencing the fraudulent permit, attaching coordinates, screenshots, and videos. I filed a secondary complaint with the county planning office, citing unpermitted construction and land use violation. I even reached out to a contact I had at a regional news site, just in case this thing snowballed. And then, because it was the 21st century and nothing is real unless you have multiple angles of it, I installed 2 new 4K solar trail cams facing both the cabin and the trail entrance. I routed both feeds through my prototype AI logging system, motion, voice detection, thermal signatures. My system would flag anything that looked like a transaction, conversation, or handoff. Then I sat back, arms crossed, watching the feed from my temporary module screen like it was live surveillance from a sting operation. Because now it was. This wasn't just some neighborly dispute. It was fraud, property theft, and commercial misuse of land. And I wasn't going to play nice. They'd trespassed, they'd lied, and they were making $200 a night doing it. They'd picked the wrong engineer to mess with. I thought maybe, just maybe, the reports would be enough to get her to back off. I underestimated Karen Ripley. 3 days after filing with the sheriff and the county zoning office, I pulled into the property on a Thursday evening, expecting silence. Instead, I found a bright orange delivery cone sitting in the middle of my private road, and a wide, fresh scar of crushed gravel weaving off to the east, cutting straight through my timberline. There was a construction trailer parked at the edge of my forest. For a second, I stood there in the truck, staring through the windshield, waiting for my brain to catch up. Then I killed the engine, got out, and walked over. On the side of the trailer was a stenciled logo, Sunset Ridge Cabins, authorized placement. The hell? I moved down the new gravel cut, crunching over fresh stone, and my gut dropped. Beyond the original cabin, a second structure was being unloaded by a flatbed rig, another prefab mini cabin, like a forest duplex. Smaller than the first, but still wired for solar. There were workers on site, one of them pulling a power drill from the truck bed. I demanded to know who authorized the delivery. One of them looked up and said, "Karen Ripley. This is her land, man. She showed us the permit yesterday." Permit? My permit? I was nearly vibrating with rage by the time I got back to the truck. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just pulled out my phone and opened my county land records app. My parcel was still in my name, Lot 4, Oakview Ridge. No split, no subdivision. I called the sheriff's office again. This time I was patched through to a deputy. He told me they were still reviewing my complaint, but hadn't received clearance to intervene yet. Then he added something that stopped me cold. "She's filed a complaint, too. Says you've been harassing her guests and damaging her rental cabins." "She what?" "According to her, you've trespassed, threatened short-term renters, and interfered with her lawful use of land she claims was included in a verbal agreement with the previous owner." Now I was boiling. There was no agreement. The land was sold to me after a full title search, surveyed, certified, notarized, and filed. She owned 2 acres across the ravine. That was it. Her land was boxed in, no access road, no development history, no services. And now she was trying to carve a driveway through my trees. I asked the deputy if they could stop the construction. He said they'd need a court order or definitive evidence of boundary violation, which, at that point, felt like asking someone to prove the ocean was wet. That same night, I received a letter. Yes, a physical printed letter in my mailbox in town. It was from an attorney representing Karen Ripley. The tone was syrupy and aggressive at the same time. Our client asserts that your recent interference with her business constitutes unlawful harassment and trespass on her peaceful enjoyment of the land. Furthermore, your installation of surveillance devices may violate the privacy rights of paying guests. There was more. They had filed a civil suit. According to the complaint, I had misrepresented parcel boundaries, knowingly encroached on land used by Ms. Ripley for legitimate business purposes, and disrupted the operation of a permitted short-term rental enterprise. They were seeking injunctive relief, damages, and an emergency hearing. She wasn't trying to avoid detection anymore. She was going on the offensive. I spent the next day reviewing everything I had: photos, video, GPS logs, ownership records. I still needed a professional court-admissible survey. But I also started to suspect something else. Because that second cabin, the one being installed, the workers seemed way too comfortable, too quick. It was like they'd done this before. And that gravel? That wasn't amateur work. That was a subcontracted job, which meant she'd planned this expansion well in advance, before I even discovered the first cabin. I realized then that this wasn't a Karen just being bold. This was strategic. She was confident, and I started to wonder, why? Then it hit me. I dug through my email and old paperwork from the land purchase. I remembered a weird delay with the original county survey, something about a holdup with a specific contractor, someone who was hard to pin down. I checked the name, Clint Devers, registered county land assessor. I'd barely met the guy, but he'd filed some of the preliminary lines that later got overridden by the final survey from the firm I hired. I searched for his name again, this time through the county public records. Turns out, Clint had also signed off on a temporary structure approval for Karen's parcel, 2 weeks before I discovered the first cabin. And then I found it. A scanned PDF of a parcel sketch. Not the real GIS map. A drawn version. Sloppy lines. A shaky signature. No GPS coordinates. It looked like it had been made in a bar over a napkin. I sat back and exhaled. She was gaming the system, exploiting personal connections, exploiting my absence, and now flipping the narrative on its head. She wanted me to look like the trespasser, the dangerous neighbor, the guy building surveillance systems in the woods, harassing poor, innocent tourists. But I wasn't going to let her own the story. She was building a lie, and I was going to tear it down. The system wasn't going to save me. If anything, the system was the problem. Permits issued off napkin sketches. A land assessor who was either lazy, crooked, or both. A sheriff's department that couldn't intervene without a judge. Meanwhile, Karen had already dropped a second cabin onto my land like she was playing Sim City with real trees and someone else's forest. I needed something irrefutable. So I did what I do best. I engineered the hell out of the problem. First, I reached out to Skyland Survey and Mapping, a private firm out of Missoula that specialized in GPS-verified topography. Not just the usual line-in-the-dirt stuff. These guys used LiDAR-equipped drones, real-time satellite triangulation, and could generate forensic-grade parcel overlays in under 72 hours. When I told them what was going on, they bumped me up the queue. 3 days later, I was hiking my land with 2 of their techs, a survey drone buzzing above the canopy, painting the forest in thousands of data points. We marked official coordinates, cross-checked with my deed, and recorded every inch of the structures, including exact placements of both cabins, fire pits, driveways, and, yes, the rogue gravel road. It wasn't even close. Both cabins were at least 150 feet inside my land. The new road cut straight through my eastern section like a logging trail. The so-called access path Karen was using, it originated from county land, snaked illegally through mine, and ended behind her fenced-off 2-acre patch. I had the data. But data alone doesn't scare people like Karen. So I sent her a letter, certified. Simple. Structures currently located on Oakview Lot 4 are in violation of Montana state trespass statutes, Ravalli County zoning ordinances, and federal property boundaries. You have 72 hours to remove all unauthorized buildings and cease all commercial activity, or I will pursue full criminal and civil action. That was Monday. By Tuesday morning, someone spray-painted "liar" on the side of my module. On Wednesday, the lock on my service shed was snapped open. Nothing stolen, just open, like a warning. That same day, I caught Martin on my trail camera again, pacing at the edge of the clearing and talking to someone on the phone. That's when I activated Sentinel mode on my prototype system. Sentinel mode wasn't public yet. It wasn't even legal for most applications. High-frequency acoustic triggers, directional mics, facial mapping based on thermal contour. It used AI to isolate speech patterns and flag them by keyword. Karen didn't know I'd flipped the switch, which meant she didn't know that every word she said outside the cabin was being logged, cross-referenced, and stored redundantly in the cloud. And oh, she talked. On Thursday, I caught her on camera explaining to a guest, cash in hand, that this entire ridge is mine now. The guy who used to own it doesn't come up much. Later that same evening, she laughed and said, "Technically, it's his land, but I filed the zoning under a shared use overlay. It's a gray area. Everyone does it." Not everyone, Karen. I compiled all the logs, video, audio, GPS overlays, even a voice recognition sample that matched her speech to the Airbnb promo video where she claimed to be a certified forest host. It was enough for a novel or a court case. I filed a second, expanded complaint with the county. This time I attached a formal cease and desist notice, notarized and backed by my counsel. I included the results of the independent survey and requested an emergency site inspection under zoning code. Unlawful construction and land fraud. 2 days later, a white SUV with a county emblem rolled up my road. 2 officials stepped out. I met them at the gate. They didn't say much at first. I walked them to the first cabin, then the second, then pointed to the trail where the road had been gouged into the hillside. One of them opened a binder, started cross-checking permit numbers. The other took photos. They didn't look pleased. Back at the cabin, they asked if I had any documentation on file. I handed over a flash drive with everything. One of them sat down at my console. 10 minutes in, he turned to his colleague and said, "She forged the parcel number. Look here. She used a dropped digit from Lot 4 to create a ghost overlay." The other guy nodded grimly. No build permit on file, no environmental clearance, no fire code registration. This is a disaster. They left without fanfare, but not before promising to escalate. That night, Airbnb froze the listing. All of them. KJ management was offline. Gone. Scrubbed from the search results like a bad memory. The link now redirected to a 404 error. But I wasn't celebrating. Because Karen Ripley hadn't run out of moves yet. And if she'd gotten this far by lying, forging, and bribing her way through the cracks of the system, then I had no doubt she'd be back. Angrier, louder, and even more desperate. The difference was, now I had a spotlight and a match. The court date came faster than I expected. It started with an official notice from the Ravalli County District Court. Karen Ripley vs. Logan Bradley. Civil complaint regarding boundary interference and business obstruction. Except now, thanks to the avalanche of evidence I'd submitted, there was a second name on the docket. County of Ravalli vs. Karen Ripley. Turns out, zoning violations are one thing, but once you start falsifying land records, evading taxes, and pocketing thousands in undeclared short-term rental income, that wakes up a whole new set of wolves. On the morning of the hearing, I walked into the county courthouse in Hamilton with a flash drive, 3 physical copies of the land survey, and my attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Marcy, who had the terrifying ability to smile like a rattlesnake. Karen was already there. She wore a burgundy power blazer that probably worked better in real estate conferences than a courtroom. Her lawyer, some local guy who looked like he coached youth baseball on the weekends, shuffled papers and avoided eye contact. The judge, an older woman with the expression of someone permanently unimpressed, opened the proceedings with a tight summary. Then she asked Karen's attorney to explain the basis for their complaint. He launched into a speech about unclear boundaries, community land sharing precedent, and mutual access rights implied through prior use. I could see the judge's eyebrow twitching by the second sentence. Then Marcy stood up. "Your Honor, the defendant would like to submit physical and digital evidence contradicting every one of those claims." She plugged in the flash drive. On the big monitor, the courtroom lit up with a live drone map, clear, color-coded parcels, GPS stamps, and cabin placements, all overlaid with legal boundaries. You could see, down to the foot, how far both of Karen's buildings intruded onto my land. Marcy let it sit for a moment. Then she played the first video. Karen, accepting cash from a guest. Smiling, handing over a code. Saying, clear as day, "You won't see anyone out here. This whole ridge is mine." Then the second video, Karen talking to Martin outside the cabin. "Just keep the guests happy. That guy doesn't even use the back half of his land." Then came the audio logs, clean, time-stamped, parsed by the AI I built. Labeled phrases, forged zoning, nobody checks permits, you can't prove anything. At one point, the judge actually leaned forward. Then came the county official, called to testify. He confirmed that Karen's permit application used a manipulated parcel ID and that she had no active building permissions, no fire code approval, and no tax declaration on file for commercial use. Karen tried to push back, said it was a mistake, blamed the assessor, said she thought her verbal agreement with the previous owner extended to shared use, claimed she had no idea the cabins weren't on her land. That's when the judge asked a question. "Ms. Ripley, did you or did you not collect rent from short-term guests at these cabins?" Karen hesitated. "Yes, but did you declare this income on your Montana state tax returns?" Silence. Her lawyer muttered something. Karen shifted in her seat. The judge looked down at her notes. "Ms. Ripley, you are hereby notified that, in addition to the civil matter, this court will be forwarding the evidence presented today to the Montana Department of Revenue and the Attorney General's Office for potential criminal review, including tax evasion, fraud, and unlawful business activity on private land." Karen turned white. By the end of the day, the court had issued a preliminary injunction, all short-term rental activity to cease immediately. Karen was ordered to vacate both cabins within 72 hours, pending further hearings. A demolition order was placed under review, contingent on a final inspection. Airbnb had already shut her account down after the county sent them my complaint and evidence. But now it was official. Her business, if you could even call it that, was dead. On the way out of the courtroom, Karen walked past me without a word. But her lawyer paused, looked at me, not angrily, almost like a warning. She doesn't go down easy. I didn't say anything, but in my head, I filed that away. Because if Karen Ripley had more moves left, I needed to be ready. This wasn't over. Not yet. I thought the worst was over after the court hearing. But people like Karen don't disappear quietly, especially not when they've built their whole world on ego, lies, and a cheap sense of control. The demolition order came 5 days after the court issued the injunction. I wasn't expecting it that fast, but apparently the county inspector's report was so damning they fast-tracked the entire thing. Gross violation of code, it read. Structures deemed unsafe, unauthorized, and in violation of private boundary law. I wasn't allowed to tear them down myself. Liability issues, so a contracted crew was sent out with a sheriff's escort. I stood near the tree line, watching as the excavator's claw crushed the roof of the second cabin like a tin can. It felt surreal. Just weeks ago, strangers had been sleeping in that thing, drinking wine by the fire pit, leaving 5-star reviews. Now it was debris. Karen wasn't there, but Martin showed up. He didn't say a word. Just sat in the Subaru, arms crossed, face tight with rage. I could tell he wanted to get out, start yelling, maybe cause a scene. But with 2 deputies nearby and a GoPro mounted to my chest, he stayed seated. Good choice. As the crew packed up, one of the deputies approached me. "You might want to be careful for a while," he said, low voice. "She's been asking around, angry, saying she's going to sue the county next." "Let her," I said, "but tell her to bring a real map this time." I smiled, but inside I stayed alert. That night, I activated full lockdown on my Sentinel system. Every motion sensor, every voice detector, every drone-mounted thermal unit. I wasn't taking chances, and it's a good thing I didn't. 3 nights later, at 2:21 in the morning, one of the perimeter mics picked up movement near the base of the old gravel trail. 2 figures, low voices. Then a loud clang. Someone trying to open my utility shed again. I pinged the alert to my phone, tapped into the nearest camera, and watched as Martin, confirmed by facial ID, stood next to a second man. Both had flashlights, and from their body language, it looked like they were trying to find a tool chest I'd moved 2 weeks ago. My system tripped a vocal deterrent. A recorded message in a deep voice. "You are on private land under active surveillance. Law enforcement has been notified." They bolted like scared raccoons. The next morning, I sent the footage to the sheriff's office. They logged it as trespassing, but without physical damage, it was just another warning. Still, the walls were closing in. Karen's listings were gone, her cabins demolished, and she was under active audit by the state tax board. Then came the cherry on top. A viral tweet. Someone had screen captured part of the courtroom feed, where Karen, red-faced, had shouted at the judge, "Well, it's just forest. Who the hell counts trees as property?" The internet did its thing. Memes were born. Turkey! Karen cabin fraud started trending regionally. One post had over 100,000 likes. "This woman really tried to Airbnb someone else's forest. Peak villain origin story." Even local media picked it up. Former realtor faces fraud charges after allegedly renting cabins on private land. That's how she was labeled. Former realtor. No longer in business. No longer the queen of her fake kingdom. Just a punchline in the online circus. I didn't laugh. Not really. There was still damage to assess, trees to restore, soil to regrade, fence lines to reinforce. But something had shifted. She wasn't in control anymore. I was. The snow came early that year, light at first, just a dusting on the ridge, but enough to quiet the forest. After months of tension, court dates, surveillance, and legal firestorms, the silence felt different now. Cleaner. Karen didn't come back. She tried, of course, filed 2 separate appeals to the demolition order. Both denied. Her attempt to sue the county fizzled out after the Planning Commission submitted their full investigation file, which included, among other things, her voice on tape joking about how nobody in Montana ever double-checks paperwork. Turns out, they do, when you rub their nose in it. I heard through my attorney that the IRS had opened an inquiry into her tax records for the past 4 years. Rumor had it, Martin had quietly listed their own parcel for sale. Apparently, shady land hustling wasn't paying like it used to. Me? I got to work. I cleared the last of the gravel from the unauthorized trail and replaced it with native grass seed. I restaked every single border of my property and added permanent steel markers with GPS tags. I installed a custom sign at the entry to the old cabin site. This land is not for rent. Ever. Don't even think about it. But I didn't stop there. Using the footage, logs, and success of my surveillance system during the entire debacle, I filed for a provisional patent under the name GeoLock Sentinel, a modular AI-powered perimeter defense system for remote properties. Within weeks, 2 landowner groups had reached out asking for pilot installs. One of them was a rancher who had recently discovered a group of influencers filming yoga videos on his hayfield without permission. I smiled when I read his message. Sometimes the universe rewards spite with opportunity. A few months later, I got a call from a journalist at Modern Landowner magazine. They'd caught wind of the case, thanks to the viral memes, and wanted to do a feature on my story. At first, I hesitated, but then I thought, why not? If my mess could help other folks avoid getting steamrolled by con artists with big mouths and zero ethics, that felt like a fair trade. The article came out with the headline, "How One Engineer Evicted a Scammer with Her Own Business Plan." I framed the print copy and hung it inside my new workshop, right next to the monitor where Sentinel ran 24/7, always watching, always listening. I hadn't seen Karen in over 6 months. Then, one morning, I spotted a car pulling up near the county road. A rental, by the plates. A young couple stepped out, looking confused, phones in hand. I walked up slowly, calm but ready. "Can I help you?" They smiled awkwardly. "We booked a cabin called Pine Haven on this ridge, but the listing's gone, and we're not sure where to check in." I took a deep breath, pointed to the sign, then nodded toward the forest. "Not here. Not anymore." They apologized, turned around, and drove off. As they disappeared around the bend, I glanced up at the little camera nestled in the tree above the sign. Its lens blinked once, recording, archiving, remembering. Just in case. Because some people build fences, others build warnings. Me? I build proof.